Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have a good broadcast for you today. It's a little short but sweet. We actually were working on an interview for today. However, the guest said it would be a more convenient time to do it on Wednesday. So keep an eye out if you're tuned in now, or I guess on the VOD. Keep an eye out this coming Wednesday for an interview that we're going to do. Should be fun. I'll leave it there just because there have been many times in our broadcasting career where we've said, oh, we're going to get this person on, and it eventually doesn't work out. But pretty sure on Wednesday we'll have a nice little interview for you. We'll make it a surprise until we promote it. This week we'll just today I should say we'll just be doing the news. I'll be presenting the news as I always do. That'll be followed by German aid to Ukraine, and then we'll maybe last week we didn't really get time to get to the Q&A, which we felt a little bad about. There's just a lot. Well, we got some of it done, but there's a lot of questions from chat. Chat was real lively, and we kind of shorthanded them with the Q&A. So we'll try to give you guys like a longer Q&A this week if you so desire. That's pretty much it for this week. So without any further delay, I will jump into the news. These are the main headlines for the week of November 24th, 2024. In the temporarily occupied city of Berdyansk, located in Zaporizhia, a significant explosion occurred late in the evening, targeting the port area. Ukrainian officials have attributed this incident to an attack on port infrastructure. According to information shared by the Berdyansk City Military Administration, the explosion took place at approximately 11:40 p.m. on November 22nd. Local residents reported hearing a loud noise originating near the port. An advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, Petro Andrushenko, commented on the incident, hinting at a confirmed strike on the port and suggesting damage to the targeted area. This is not the first such incident in Berdyansk. On October 31st, explosions reportedly caused by a drone strike also struck the port in the occupied region. Explosions followed by a fire have occurred at a key arsenal belonging to the Main Missile and Artillery Directorate of Russia's Ministry of Defense in the town of Karachev, located in Bryansk. Ukrainian officials and local Russian authorities have provided varying accounts. According to Andrei Kovalenko, who leads Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation, the arsenal was struck and contained a significant stockpile of weaponry. This included artillery shells, ammunition for multiple launch rocket systems, North Korean-sourced artillery, guided aerial bombs, and anti-aircraft missiles. The method of attack was not specified, although Kovalenko mentioned that drones were used to attack the facility in the past. The governor of Bryansk Oblast, Alexander Bogomaz, acknowledged the incident, attributing it to a drone attack. He claimed that air defenses successfully intercepted the drones, resulting in no casualties or damage, although these assertions are unverified. Despite the statements, a video of the explosion was widely circulated on social media. Kovalenko also mentioned that Ukraine struck key facilities in Russia, including a plant in Belgorod Oblast that covertly produces cargo drones for military purposes, and a weapons arsenal in Novgorod. On November 21st, Norwegian authorities arrested a security guard employed at the U.S. Embassy in Oslo on suspicion of espionage for Russia and Iran. The individual, a man in his 20s, is accused of compromising national security through his intelligence activities. He is admitted to collecting and sharing information with Russian and Iranian authorities, but denies the espionage charges. The suspect is currently pursuing a bachelor's degree in security and preparedness at Norway's Arctic University. This incident marks the second espionage-related case at UIT, or the Arctic University, in recent years. In 2022, a guest researcher at the university, initially identified as a Brazilian named José Assis Guimarães, was arrested on espionage allegations and later revealed to be a Russian national named Mikhail Valerievich Mikushin. Norway shares a 198-kilometer border with Russia and has implemented stricter entry regulations for Russian nationals since the full-scale invasion in February 2022. In September, the Norwegian government considered constructing a fence along all or part of its border with Russia to enhance security. As of the morning of November 23, 2024, 6 Russian ships equipped with Caliber cruise missiles are stationed in the Black Sea. These vessels are part of a larger group of 20 Russian ships in the area, with a total launch capacity of up to 23 Caliber missiles. The Sea of Azov currently has no Russian naval presence. South Korea's top security advisor, Shin Won-sik, stated on November 22nd that Moscow has reportedly provided North Korea with air defense systems, including anti-air missiles, in exchange for military support in the Kursk region of Russia. According to Shin, this arrangement also includes various forms of economic aid and promises of Russian assistance to Pyongyang in satellite technology. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced plans to continue testing an experimental intermediate-range ballistic missile after its use in a strike on Ukrainian territory in Dnipro, sparking condemnation from Ukraine and many allies. Speaking at a defense conference on Friday, Putin defended the tests, emphasizing that Russia has a sufficient stock of the missile for further testing in combat conditions, quote, and is preparing for serial production. The missile is reportedly a modified RS-26 Rubezh intercontinental ballistic missile, is nuclear capable and capable of striking targets across Europe, according to Sergei Karakayev, Russia's Strategic Missile Forces commander. President Zelensky criticized Russia's use of Ukraine as a testing ground for such weapons and urged global condemnation, including from nations in the global south. He also called for urgent consultations with Ukraine's allies to secure enhanced air defense systems to counter the new threat. NATO and Ukraine are set to hold emergency talks on Tuesday to address the situation, which Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk described as a dramatic and decisive phase of the conflict. Ukraine's parliament canceled a session following the strike, tightening security measures in response. The missile, referred to by the Russian military as Oreshnik or Hazel, has raised international concerns. While U.S. officials downplay the missile as a, quote, game changer, they have criticized its nuclear capabilities and Russia's continued escalation in the war. Meanwhile, Zelensky called on countries like China and Brazil, which have proposed a joint peace plan, to actively condemn Moscow's actions, arguing that diplomatic gestures without consequences embolden Russia to continue their assaults. The armed forces of Ukraine have established their first school dedicated to training operators of unmanned ground robotic systems, as reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The program is already underway and focuses on preparing personnel to operate various types of robotic systems, including those for logistics, specialized tasks, and engineering applications. The initiative involves training operators on approximately 10 different types of ground-based unmanned systems. Efforts are ongoing to expand and enhance the program to improve training efficiency and develop robust educational infrastructure. The training program also includes a structured curriculum aligned with specific military specialties. To ensure high-quality instruction, specialized software has been developed and training samples of robotic systems are utilized. The program emphasizes both theoretical knowledge and hands-on practical skills, ensuring that the trainees are fully prepared for operational scenarios. The training duration for the system crews has been planned to ensure a comprehensive preparation. The head of the Innovation Activity Department highlighted the importance of adopting forward-looking approaches to military development, stating that integrating innovative solutions like the school are a critical step to enhancing the capabilities of Ukraine's armed forces. Up next, we have economic news. The Biden administration has formally notified Congress of its intent to cancel half of Ukraine's $4.6 billion in debt incurred from economic assistance, according to a statement by State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller during a Wednesday briefing. This decision aligns with the provisions in earlier legislation that grant the president authority to forgive portions of the loan. Miller explained that Congress has the option to challenge the decision through a resolution of objection. However, he expressed confidence that such objection is unlikely, citing strong bipartisan support in Congress for aid to Ukraine. The loan cancellation stems from a broader supplemental spending bill passed in April, which allocated $95 billion in funding, including $61 billion for Ukraine. As part of the package, $10 billion was designated as economic aid to Kyiv directly, structured as a conditional loan. The bill empowered President Biden to cancel up to half of this loan starting on November 15, 2024, with the remaining eligible for cancellation by the next president, January 1, 2026. The United Nations Development Program, in collaboration with the Japanese government, has provided critical energy equipment to Kharkiv and Odessa to support their essential infrastructure amidst continued Russian attacks targeting Ukraine's energy systems. The announcement was made by Ukraine's Ministry of Energy. Kharkiv received 15 variable frequency drives and a gas turbine, both vital for maintaining the infrastructure. In Odessa, 2 advanced gas piston cogeneration units will be installed, complementing 2 previously delivered units. Together, these systems are expected to fulfill approximately 50% of the energy requirements for the city's critical infrastructure, ensuring the operation of water supplies, heating, and sewage systems. With the assistance of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, 32 water generators will be delivered to further bolster infrastructure in the affected regions. Ukraine and Italy are set to enhance their collaboration in the supply of critical raw materials, focusing on strengthening value chains, advancing research and innovation, and conducting comprehensive mapping and exploration activities. This initiative was highlighted by Ukraine's first Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economy, Yulia Sverdenko, during the Ukraine-Italy Business Forum in Rome. A key aspect of the partnership involves potential cooperation between Italy's Institute for Environmental Protection and Research and Ukraine's State Service of Geology and Subsoil. This collaboration aims to promote safe and sustainable practices within the value chains of critical raw materials, as well as expanding commercial and investment opportunities. Sverdenko emphasized that attracting investment and fostering innovation in the critical raw materials sector is a priority for Ukraine, and that cooperation with Italy will help achieve the objectives. The Croatian Ministry of Defense has announced the transfer of 30 M84 tanks and 30 M80 infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine, with a total estimated value of nearly €145 million. This valuation includes spare parts and ammunition, as detailed by the Croatian defense minister. This marks the first time M84 tanks, a Yugoslav-built adaptation of the Soviet T-72 M1, will be supplied to Ukraine. These tanks were initially manufactured under license in Yugoslavia and later updated to the M84A Snapshire standard by Croatia. The modernization enhanced the tank's firepower through a DBR-84 ballistic computer and an advanced day-night infrared sight system for the gunner. The tanks were also equipped with a more powerful 1,000 horsepower V46TK diesel engine and improved turret and gun guidance systems. However, their armor protection remains at the level of the original T-72M1, T-72A, as they lack dynamic or additional armor packages. The M80 IFVs, developed in Yugoslavia in the 1970s, are often mistakenly associated with the Soviet BMP-2, but are in fact distinct vehicles. They feature a German-licensed Daimler-Benz engine delivering 320 horsepower and are armed with a 20mm Hispano-Suiza HS-804 automatic gun capable of firing 1,000 rounds per minute. In exchange for this military assistance, Croatia will receive financial support from Germany to purchase modern Leopard 2A8 tanks, further bolstering their own defense capabilities. Ukraine has secured a $4.8 billion loan agreement with the World Bank to support priority budgetary needs, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Finance. The agreement was signed on November 22nd by the Finance Minister Serhiy Marchenko and the World Bank's Eastern Europe Operations Manager Kevin Tomlinson, under the framework of the Public Expenditures for Administrative Capacity Endurance, or PEACE project. The funding, facilitated by contributions from the United States and other international partners, is directed at alleviating the economic strain caused by Russia's ongoing full-scale invasion. The U.S. contribution is coordinated through USAID in collaboration with the Department of Treasury and State, ensuring funds are delivered to Ukraine's state budget. The loan will be utilized for critical expenditures, including pensions for elderly citizens, financial assistance for internally displaced persons, and salaries for key workers such as teachers, first responders, and emergency service personnel. During a visit to Sweden, Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov secured an agreement with his Swedish counterpart, Pal Johnson, for Sweden to fund the production of Ukrainian-made long-range drones. The agreement follows the so-called Danish model, where foreign governments directly finance military production for Ukraine's defense needs. The agreement involves Sweden purchasing drones specifically for the Ukrainian armed forces, a step Umerov described as a demonstration of trust in Ukraine's defense industry. The ministers also discussed plans to finance additional military aid for 2025, with an emphasis on equipping Ukrainian forces with advanced military hardware. Negotiations on this aspect of cooperation are reportedly nearing their conclusion. Umerov also met with representatives of Swedish defense companies to explore collaborative projects. Discussions included potential production of military equipment, artillery, optics, guidance systems, communications technology, and air defense systems. A key focus is on localizing production within Ukraine, forming joint ventures, increasing production volumes, and acquiring advanced weaponry and technologies. The International Monetary Fund released a statement emphasizing Ukraine's reliability as a borrower and its strong debt repayment strategy, framing financial support to Ukraine as both a moral and economic imperative for its international partners. The IMF's representative to Ukraine, Priscilla Tofano, underscored that providing funding now is significantly more cost-effective for Western allies than addressing the potential economic and social fallout of a Ukrainian defeat, which would include increased defense budgets and refugee-related expenses. Tofano acknowledged Ukraine's efforts to boost domestic revenue generation, but highlighted the profound economic shock caused by Russia's aggression. External funding, such as the G7's $50 billion initiative under the Accelerating Emergency Revenue Arrangements, or ERA for Ukraine, remains essential to stabilize the country. This funding is drawn from frozen Russian assets, providing critical support to Ukraine's war efforts. Looking ahead, Tofano stressed the need for Ukraine to prepare for the post-war period, which will bring substantial financial demands, including reconstruction, social programs for veterans, and incentives to encourage displaced citizens to return. The IMF has proposed several strategies to ensure fiscal sustainability, including raising taxes, particularly value-added tax, improving expenditure planning, and aligning policies with Ukraine's EU accession goals. The IMF also noted the importance of structuring a long-term fiscal strategy with plans such as the 2026-2028 budget declaration to address rising costs both during and after the war. While restructuring external debt is on the table, equity financing is seen as less favorable. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, during a visit to Kyiv on November 19th, announced a €130 million investment in Ukraine's defense industry. Frederiksen highlighted that Ukraine's wartime experience provides invaluable lessons for other European nations. She expressed interest in facilitating visits from European industrial sectors, including Denmark's, to Ukraine to gain insights into their ability to expand and modernize production lines under wartime conditions. The European Union has expanded its legal framework for imposing sanctions on individuals and entities linked to the supply of Iranian weapons to Russia for their war in Ukraine. This includes new measures targeting the transfer of Iranian-made missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles, and related technologies. 1 individual and 4 shipping companies have been added to the sanctions list. The updated measures prohibit the export or sale of components from the EU to Iran that could be used in developing missiles and UAVs. The EU has also introduced a transaction ban, restricting interactions with ports, locks, and vessels involved in transferring Iranian weapons or related components to Russia. Key facilities impacted include Iranian ports such as Amirabad and Anzali, except in cases requiring maritime safety, humanitarian aid, or emergencies. Among those newly sanctioned are the Islamic Republic of Iran shipping lines and its director, Mohammad Reza Khiabani, due to their role in transporting drones for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. Also listed are 3 Russian shipping companies, MG Flot, BTS Broker, and Arapax, whose vessels have facilitated the transfer of Iranian-made weapons across the Caspian Sea to resupply forces in Ukraine. Russia is introducing a draft law offering loan debt relief for up to 10 million rubles, approximately $100,000 to individuals who enlist in the military as part of efforts to boost recruitment for the war. According to the Moscow Times, the State Duma is set to consider the proposal on November 19th, following its approval in the first reading on October 29th. The law applies to debts associated with court orders or enforcement proceedings initiated before December 1st, 2024, and offers loan forgiveness to both veterans and their families. The measure also proposes extending the grace period for suspected borrower obligations to 180 days after military service from the originally proposed 30 days. The initiative is part of a significant rise in debt enforcement cases in Russia. In the first 9 months of 2024, lenders pursued the recovery of 141 trillion rubles or $14.1 billion US dollars, a 34% increase compared to the same period in 2023. During this time, 10.9 million new enforcement proceedings were initiated, an 11% increase, bringing the total active cases against individuals to 24 million, valued at 3.37 trillion rubles or $33 billion. And last up, we have international relations. The parliament of Georgia's breakaway region of Abkhazia has approved the resignation of its Russia-backed president Aslan Zhanya following days of anti-government unrest in Sukhumi. Zhanya announced his resignation as part of an agreement reached with opposition forces, which also called for the resignation of the prime minister and the evacuation of protesters from occupied government buildings. Vice President Badre Gunba will lead an interim government until a new presidential election is held, although a date has not yet been set. The unrest began on October 11th after the detention of 5 activists opposing a proposed investment treaty with Russia. Although their release briefly calmed tensions, protests resumed on October 17th when the Abkhaz parliament considered ratifying a controversial agreement with Moscow that offered significant tax and custom exemptions to Russian investors. Protesters clashed with law enforcement, stormed government buildings, and demanded Zhanya's resignation. The protests are part of widespread discontent with Russian influence in Abkhazia, particularly regarding proposals to allow foreign ownership of local property. Critics argue that these measures, including the previously withdrawn apartments bill, would disproportionately benefit Russian oligarchs and erode Abkhazia's autonomy. Concerns about being swallowed by Russian presence have fueled opposition to the policies. The Russian-Abkhazian agreement has been a focal point of contention. Advocates, including Zhanya, argue that it would attract investment and boost the region's economy. However, opponents view it as a step towards greater Russian control. Russia's foreign ministry condemned the protests, warning that the instability in Abkhazia could deter foreign investment and harm its socio-economic development. Russian tourism to Abkhazia is a key economic driver of their economy and has already been impacted, with hundreds of cancellations reported following the unrest. With its subtropical climate and proximity to Russia, it's a popular destination for Russian tourists who comprise the bulk of its visitors. In 2024, 1.4 million Russians traveled to the region, with projections of 1.6 million in 2025. However, the political instability has led many to reconsider their travel plans. Dmitry Shapovalov, a man who staged a political protest by climbing a billboard in Moscow and displaying a banner reading, "Putin, where are you, bitch? Make room for me," has been sentenced to 15 days in jail. The sentence was issued on charges of disobeying police orders, according to RTVI. The court ruling states that Shapovalov ignored repeated requests from police officers to descend from the billboard. Despite his initial refusal, he eventually did climb down after spending over 2 hours in the cold weather. Police reports claim he resisted and obstructed officers, although Shapovalov denied resisting and explained his actions were a political statement. He reportedly admitted guilt, emphasizing that his protest was intended to express his political views. His demonstration garnered attention before police and emergency services arrived on the scene. The Euromaidan protests, which began this week on November 21st in 2013, marked a turning point in Ukraine's modern history, catalyzing their transformation towards democracy, national identity, and independence from Russian influence. Sparked by then-President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to abandon Ukraine's EU integration in favor of closer ties with Russia, the protests grew into a nationwide movement known as the Revolution of Dignity. Euromaidan began with university students gathering at Kyiv's central Maidan Square to demand European integration and protest at Yanukovych's pro-Russian policies. The movement quickly gained momentum after security forces violently dispersed the peaceful protesters. News of children being beaten by police mobilized Ukrainians across the country, uniting citizens around ideals of dignity, human rights, and national sovereignty. The protests evolved beyond foreign policy issues, reflecting widespread frustration with corruption, economic stagnation, and repression. The movement drew strength from a growing middle class, cultural elites, and a civil society determined to break free from Ukraine's post-Soviet malaise. Euromaidan was a largely self-organized and horizontal movement. Protesters created an infrastructure of support, including field kitchens, medical stations, and even a, quote, Maidan University, where participants discussed Ukraine's future. The defensive core of the movement, called the Self-Defense of Maidan, played a crucial role in protecting protesters from riot police. This group was initially armed with makeshift shields and helmets, but grew more organized with support from sympathetic former security professionals. Protests spread to cities across Ukraine, with regional demonstrations strategically disrupting local police deployments and amplifying pressure on the government. The movement reached its peak in February 2014 when government snipers killed dozens of protesters on Institutska Street. This violence, intended to crush the revolution, only intensified resolve among the protesters. Leaders like Volodymyr Parasyuk openly rejected compromises, threatening to escalate if Yanukovych refused to resign. Faced with growing resistance and a collapsing support base, Yanukovych fled Ukraine on February 22, 2014. And that wraps up the major news items for this week. We will now move to the next segment.
Yeah, and that should be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present the most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. This week, I actually got a little bit more to report, so my segment will be a bit longer. Starting with Monday, the German city of Dortmund has donated a fully functional sewer cleaning vehicle that is urgently needed for infrastructure maintenance to its Ukrainian twin city of Zhytomyr. On the same day, on the sidelines of an Ukraine conference of long-term support and reconstruction in Ukraine, the German federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia has handed over 6 fire brigade and police vehicles to Serhiy Lysak, sorry if I butchered that name, the governor of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. The German city of Bonn handed over 4 personal transport vehicles to the from the Bonn Fire Brigade to the German-Ukrainian organization Blau-Gelbes Kreuz e.V. on Tuesday, which will transport the donated vehicle to Bonn's Ukrainian twin city, Kherson. The German government has updated their website on military assistance for Ukraine on Wednesday. In the past 5 weeks, Germany has delivered the following military assistance to Ukraine: 60 Golden Eagle UAVs, 12 Hornet XR UAVs, 100 RQ-35 Hydron UAVs, 20 Vector UAVs, 2 VT-4 Rochen UAVs, 120 Songbird UAVs, 4 Panzerhaubitze 2000 self-propelled artillery systems, 7 spare barrels for the M109 howitzers, 47 FFG MRAPs, 8 Caracal air assault vehicles, 1 TRMLD for the air surveillance radar, 2 bridge-laying tanks Beaver, 3 recent 1MC mine-clearing tanks, 3 mine plows, 6 Oshkosh M1070 tank transporters, 11 border protection vehicles. I'm nearly finished, don't worry. 41,155 shells, ammunition for the Marder 1A3 IFVs, 8,000 rounds of 40mm ammunition for the automatic grenade launchers, 74,000 rounds of ammunition for the HLR 338, which is a long range precision rifle, 100,000 rounds of small arms ammo, 55,000 tourniquets, and 100,000 chest seals. Pretty long list. Germany also pledged to deliver another 75 Vector UAVs, 43 Songbird UAVs, and 30 tracked and remote controlled infantry vehicles, Gerion RCS. And last but not least, a German delegation, including the German ambassador to Ukraine, Martin Jäger, visited the 10th separate operative response detachment Dozor of the Ukrainian border guards on Thursday and handed over an unspecified double-digit number of armored Toyota Land Cruiser 300 SUVs and Kawasaki buggies, which you see in the image right there. And yeah, that's it for my segment. Back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, sir. So I think we have maybe like 2 little things to talk about, and then we'll get to Q&A stuff. So the first one I think is just about the missile stuff. I wasn't paying enough attention at the time, but I know that there was some a lot of discussion among the Tochnyi staff about this recent missile test Russia did. All I do during the headlines section is kind of just cover all the mainstream media reporting about it. So what I can say is that pretty much exclusively every major mainstream media organization that I'm aware of reported it as an ICBM. But I think that's like inaccurate based on like our resident missile expert. I know John Ridge corrected it and said it's an IRBM. I don't know what the distinction would be. But then I think Erlend also might have some other information about this. So Erlend, as I mentioned, like the mainstream coverage was pretty concrete and clear, but I'm not sure it was accurate. So could you maybe clarify anything that maybe you want to clarify?
I mean, it was accurate because he referenced the person that said the statement. So in that sense, it wasn't inaccurate. But as far as we've seen, and I know that John Ridge has been following this, and I think Daniela has been looking a little bit at it as well. It's not an ICBM. It has a different classification, and this is a definition, question or debate. In the end, it's not that important. What is important is that it's something Russia has never fired before in a war, or no one has fired before in a war, and it's obviously a political statement. This is Russia posturing itself, saying that these are red lines, look at us, and basically trying to threaten the West to not allow Ukraine to fire long-range missiles into Russia, which they have said over and over again is a red line, and that they will nuke whatever if Ukraine does this, which is
and if I understand the significance of the threat, Erlend, it's that these IRBM or this particular missile, we'll just call it that, could be used. It has range to fire like into Europe. Is that kind of the point?
I think it has range to fire all of Europe, yes, and that is kind of the threat here. Yeah, and we don't really have that many means that can theoretically intercept the missile, although I think there are possible means around. It's not just something that is highly available. So that's the threat. Look at what we can do. We made it rain down on Dnipro, and Ukrainians had no way of intercepting it, and we can put it in nuke on this thing as well. And you have very little warning time to take cover or anything. So that's kind of the threat here. In the end, it's just empty threats, in my opinion, just like they always do. The Russians doesn't want a nuclear war. They have their sons and daughters all around Europe, in Paris, London. They're not going to send nukes on London or Paris.
Yeah, and also, as far as I remember, John mentioning that it's like coming back to me in like fits and starts, was that this is a missile they converted from another stock of missile. They don't basically Putin said they're going to mass produce this thing. That doesn't seem likely based on like what this missile is. Is that accurate?
It would be very, very costly for their industry. That's kind of what I've understood.
Yeah, so I think that those are probably two good points, is that it's not really an intercontinental ballistic missile, but I think that for the most part, the media got correct that this is like a threat to Europe, basically. I think that's what Erlend said is all correct. And then that
it's a definition question. And I think that in the end, the analysis about what this is, which is a threat against Europe and the US in some way to basically constrain Ukraine to not be able to fire these long-range missiles, that is the question here. It's not so much about the technology, in my opinion.
Agree. Yeah. And then the second thing I wanted to talk about was this cable line stuff. So I think most people know, right? A lot of our communications infrastructure is a lot of undersea cables. It's since the 20th century, it's been an important aspect of how we communicate. And in wartime, it's not infrequent. So going back to World War I, to like use specialized tools to destroy those cables. So it's not like crazy to insinuate that this could be happening. But as far as I understand, so there were a lot of reports this week that 2 cables in Europe got cut. As far as I understand, there were no significant disruptions to internet traffic, and there was a lot of accusations flying around. The ships, usually when these incidents happen, are Chinese, which is just kind of, I don't know if I'm maybe generalizing there, but I've noticed that in the media reports. As far as I understand, at least one of the ships was Chinese. And there I saw, again, this is just me looking on Twitter. I think Twitter's a terrible place to learn things because you can maybe get some early information, but if you don't know how to put it in context and separate it from noise, it's not very useful. But in this case, they showed pictures of like a Chinese ship with like a weird looking anchor. And they basically were like, 2 naval experts say this is a weird ship with a weird anchor. And so the implication being, of course, that there might be overt acts of sabotage. I don't have enough of a baseline to know 2 cables in short succession, if that's a big deal, and blah, blah, blah. It feels to me like this could be a very much an either way thing for me. I didn't look too much into it, so I was just curious. Does anyone have maybe a hotter take on this? Have they looked into it more? Is there a pretty serious case to be made that this in some way relates to Russia's sabotage efforts, which are in fact happening in Europe? Or it feels to me like people were talking about it a lot on Twitter and a little bit in the mainstream media, and then the missile incident happened, and then everyone started talking about that, and I haven't really heard about it since then. So I'm just curious if you guys had any extra information about it. I chose not to kind of include it in the reports for that reason.
I don't have any extra information from what has been published basically by Danish news, which has been kind of the largest mainstream media that has been publishing stuff about this, because the Danish Coast Guard seems to have basically stopped this vessel between Denmark and Sweden. I haven't seen anything more about what the results of that has been, and I would say just in anticipation of news about what the results of an eventual boarding of that vessel has been. I kind of feel like not much is going to happen, unfortunately.
As far as I know, because there are a few Germans who actually cover this and tweet about this a lot or post about it a lot on Blue Sky. The last thing I read was from today. I believe the ship is already sailing again, and it's getting constantly accompanied by a Danish vessel, a German patrol boat, and I believe a third country is also involved in this. Escorted was the word I'm searching for. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so it sounds like we haven't heard any solid information that it's definitely not some kind of a sabotage activity going on by some state actor, but we also haven't heard anything that confirms it. So we're kind of waiting for more information to come in for anything serious, right?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is if the Danish authorities will release some information about what they eventually found, if they boarded the vessel or not, which is not certain.
And the Russians, I just want to say, the Russians are also now involved in this. I believe in a tweet I saw yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday. I don't know if you noticed it, but their Russian chip is now also like monitoring the situation. Missile corvette, if I recall correctly.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not sure though if the vessel is there because of this, because this might be a coincidence, but yeah, it was apparently coming back from Syria, so we'll see.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a case where like a lot of stuff could just be a bunch of random stuff lining up, and like it's certainly not outside of Russia's wheelhouse. Russia is we have confirmation from intelligence agencies in Europe and the United States that Russia has an active program in their own foreign intelligence agencies to conduct acts of just overt sabotage in Europe and the United States. So this wouldn't be like crazy for them to do. But at the same time, we try to give you guys like solid evidence that things are happening versus just kind of rumors or kind of going crazy before we know anything. So hopefully that was a good summary or a good elaboration. It's mainly stuff I was going to include in the news report, but I was like, I don't really know enough about it to really talk about it, so I just kind of glossed over it. So I'm glad you guys were there to provide a little more context. So I see you pulled up, I believe this is Daniela's new article. Is that correct, Mr. Erlend?
No, it's not really Daniela's article. But it's an article, and it's the latest article we posted. It's an in-depth study, I would say, of the current Russian logistic system. So this article is basically describing and giving an introduction to what happened and how the Russian logistics units are structured after the reforms that started around 2010, where the Russians tried to get these restructured, more emphasize on a lot more efficiency. And we have been looking at a lot of different information from Russian sources and other places so we could draw a pretty good picture of how the structures of these logistics units are. So you find quite a lot of ORBAT material here. Working on the translation for this that will be added as a separate download. But it's actually very difficult to translate all this stuff because so many acronyms and things. But yeah, it's a very interesting article for those that are interested in learning more about how the Russian logistics system works, which has shown to be very resilient, more than we would expect. So that is that article, and I think it's worth a look.
Yeah, so people should head down to Tochnyi.info and check out all the great articles there. We have a lot of great authors. I guess like Erlend. Go ahead.
I just want to say also that there is an upcoming article which I'm very, very happy that we will be able to present soon, which is about the Ukrainian effort to intercept ISR drones with FPV drones, and it's a very, very comprehensive article about this subject of one of the people that have been tracking this in the basement. So that's cool.
Dare I say air-on-air combat?
I would say interceptions. I think that air-on-air combat is when two drones of the same kind of category is just meeting and then bump into each other. That's kind of the air-to-air combat.
I'm like in my little office at Tochnyi, on the Tochnyi server, and once in a while I hear the people, usually from the basement, say like air-on-air combat, or so I was curious if it was the same thing, but it sounds like no.
No, the FPV drones that are taking down these surveillance drones are doing a very specific thing, and it's an interception. That's what it is.
I got you. Yeah, these surveillance drones fly like pretty high up, and they're difficult to take down, right? So it requires, as far as I understand, a pretty specialized ability to do that. Is that accurate?
Yep. They fly very high and also are very much more exposed for electronic warfare because they are basically visible for everyone that are in range. While when you're in the terrain, you will both have the challenges of the terrain, but also have the cover of the terrain. They are very specialized. They cost a little bit more, but the benefit of being able to take down these drones is just very, very high. And also we've seen that the Russians are struggling to get as much ISR coverage of the front lines as they had before, which was a huge problem. And we've seen a huge drop in Lancet attacks. And the assumption is that they basically don't have coverage, the coverage they need to use the Lancets, and that's very good. And also that means that they might not be able to do as good targeting for artillery, for rocket artillery, and for ballistic missiles, which has been a very big problem the last year, because the Russians have been flying a lot of ISR drones.
Yeah, I mean, if they, that's how a lot of these targets are found and chosen, right? Are these reconnaissance drones? It's obviously a lot safer to use a drone than a person to mark an asset. There's other ways to get it, right? All of these weapon systems are pretty agnostic. You give them coordinates, but this has been a really significant way the Russians are getting those coordinates. So to have Ukraine able to take down a lot of these reconnaissance drones is a really big deal, as Erlend said. So. Yeah, good news. We'll be interested to read about that report. I did want to ask you about the logistics thing. Is there any kind of story you can tell with that? Like, in other words, there was a pretty significant reformation, I would say, of the Russian military after the invasion of Georgia in 2008? I don't remember exactly when this reform started, but the idea was like, oh, the Russian military is going to be kind of leaner and like be able to bring firepower down where they need and blah, blah, blah. I imagine like logistics was a big part of that. So is the article about those reforms and kind of how they've been implemented, or is it more about how they're adapting to the war itself? Or
well, the article itself is basically a description of how the logistic units are right now. We did have an article before about also the logistics system and storage facilities, which is a separate thing. This is just about the units itself, which are, of course, related to the structures, the physical structures. Yeah, and it's basically just a description of how they are structured right now. Having a study of how it was before, I think, would be a little bit too much to deal with right now. But yeah, they did cut a lot. They did, but for the better for them, because they had a lot of dead meat and structures that, skeleton battalions and all that kind of stuff, where basically on paper there was a brigade, but it wasn't really there. So they've been doing a lot of reforms to make the system more efficient. And before I can, I can't really talk to the efficiency of each unit or anything like this. But as we see, they managed to keep the machinery running, which makes me believe that these reforms have at least contributed in a positive way for the Russian armed forces.
Yeah, that makes sense. It also, I remember, like, especially towards the beginning of the war, like the number of military trucks the Russian military was losing was like insane. And we, at that time, I think that was really one of the serious problems they were having. I imagine it's still an issue, but I think, as you said, like they've managed to keep their military logistics going, I think, longer than, and suffer a level of attrition that I think most militaries would have looked at and said, like, that can't be sustainable, or that's not sustainable. So I don't know. It's interesting. It sounds like, so it's pretty much a more descriptive article about the makeup of the Russian logistics units and how they work. And then I would say maybe the article itself doesn't have a thesis, but I think we can infer from just the continued operation of Russian logistics at all, considering the state of things, that it works, or it's as you said, it's resilient in some way. So
yeah, it's basically an article that can be used for people who want to learn more about how the Russian army is structured, and in this specific subject. It's about the logistics units, which hasn't been really, published in English language anywhere before. So that's kind of why this article was written. And we have some people that have been working on this, kind of a byproduct of other work that they've been doing, but found out that this should be also summed up in article form. And I think also the Orbats is kind of what a military analyst would have would look at as very handy to be able to just download from the website, and that's fine.
Maybe one last question for you, Erlend. I apologize for putting you in the role of explaining the article or explaining Russian logistics, but I feel like we're visiting here and might as well get our fill. So I would say that the sort of general attitude or the general impression is that Russian logistics is very like train heavy and train dependent. In other words, if the Russians have like a good like railhead with like a lot of like depots and stuff, and they have the infrastructure in place to do like serious train logistics, they're going to be fine. But anytime they kind of wander too far from the train depots, they're kind of in trouble. Like, do you think that based on your like reading of that article and kind of all that stuff, do you think that's accurate, or do you think that that's maybe a oversimplification of Russian logistics?
Yeah, I would say it's an oversimplification, not because of what I learned from helping out with this article, but because of looking at what the Russians have been doing since 2022. There's been a number of times where trains haven't really been available for frontline deliveries, like until the Russians managed to actually build a new train line in between Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia. That part of land had not really been supplied by train for the most part, and it was certainly not something that a deal breaker for the Russians. Let's say that. But I've heard this over and over again. The Russians are going to have problems because they don't have trucks. They need to use trains, blah, blah, blah. But eventually, we haven't seen any problems on the Russian side because of this. So I can imagine for a logistics officer in Russia, he would hammer me and say like, "Oh my God, you have no idea how much trouble we have." But they sorted it out. So yeah. It's kind of one of those things I feel has been inflated as a concept, like the tires that are rotting in Siberia, and Russians don't know how to do truck logistics. I don't know. It's
Yeah,
I don't know.
agree with you.
I don't know really why this has been such a big thing.
I think it's this kind of constant, because I think everyone can see things aren't going right eventually, and like there's kind of this refusal to acknowledge reality by the Russian side. In other words, like the Russian military can't actually end the war. They can't just go to Putin and say we can't win, we want to go home. They're locked in, and they basically have to lie. And when Putin asks, I assume they go, the war's going great, or at least there's like, we're doing it, we're working. So the point is like, the wheels have to come off at some point. And I think everyone's wondering, is like, that'll be the thing, right? This thing or that thing. And there's this constant like effort to be like, well, this will be the Achilles heel that like makes the wheels come off this crazy enterprise and, kind of derails the whole thing. But I think, the reality is just more complicated than that. And I think, as you said, there's been a lot of attributions of things that, the Russian economy will collapse by now. The Russian logistics will collapse by now. The Russian soldiers will mutiny by now. And I think it's good to have a more like sober-eyed reading of all this to say, it definitely matters. We're not suggesting it doesn't matter, but, it's maybe a fool's errand to look at that stuff and be like, that's going to be the thing that kind of ends this or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think you're right there. And these kind of issues might be one of the contributing factors to Russia having problems in the war generally. And maybe if Ukraine can resist and continue the fight for another year, maybe all of these issues will be adding up as too much to handle for the Russian military. But until that happens, saying that this is going to end the Russian military because they don't have trucks left has ended up as a not good take. And it's been a lot of these, and I'm probably guilty of saying some of these kind of hot takes myself, but I think, I don't think this is going to be the crushing hand, even though I would be very positively surprised if suddenly they don't have more trucks and no more ammo is going to arrive at the front lines. But yeah, we have not seen any signs of that. I see a lot of videos of trucks being blown up all the time, and been breaking down some videos where there's a lot of trucks. So they certainly have trucks to pull from their magazines still.
Yeah. Unless we have anything else on this topic, but I think thanks, Erlend, for showing that off. I think it sounds like an interesting article if people are curious. I think Erlend's right that like you can probably find this in some dusty military manual somewhere, on probably deep in the bowels of the internet. But it's, as far as just making it available for a general audience, it's probably not that easy to find technical information about Russian logistics units. So I would say give that a read if that sounds like your cup of tea. Check it out at Tochnyi.info. We have a lot of great articles there, as Erlend mentioned. Anything else you want to add about this, Erlend?
Well, I just wanted to mention that, this kind of is complementary to the article of the logistics system of Russia storage facilities, which is also been scraping a lot of information from manuals, from general OSINT observations, it's a complementary article. So maybe start off with this one if you're interested, because those two are related in some way.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that to the audience's attention, Erlend. I think we're going to maybe move towards a Q&A. If anyone has any questions in the chat, I think last week we said we were going to get back to the questions, but I think we lost them. So sorry about that. If you have a question from any time, or just a general question, feel free to ask. I had one other topic I was going to bring up.
I did read through all the questions, and they were all for Mirko. So that's like,
we have to get back on. That's what that means.
Yeah. So
one thing why we maybe wait for a couple of questions. I just want to get into one thing which you mentioned in the chat, Joseph, when you talked about the German Ringtausch stuff. You said, another tank for the Ukrainian logistical and mechanics. No, I just want to mention that I do agree, like it's another tank, but first of all, as far as I know, it's based on the T-72. So I don't think the Ukrainians have a lot of trouble working with the tank. And apart from that, you have to think, apart, of course, that it's a huge deal for the German industry. I mean, that's possibly a €1 billion deal, right? But apart from that, for the Ukrainians, who get 30 tanks, 30 IFVs, and a big spare parts package and this big ammunition package for the already existing IFVs, because Ukraine already operates these kinds of IFVs, and you get that within 8 weeks to Ukraine. And I think that's of course, it's not the modern one, right? It's not a new Leopard 2A6 or 2A4 or whatever, but it's still like 30 tanks, 30 IFVs, a lot of spare parts, and a lot of ammunition within 8 weeks to Ukraine. And I think that's still a good deal, though.
No, you're absolutely right.
I just want to mention that.
You're totally right. I was just kidding around. I agree with you. Number one, every piece of military equipment helps. It's obviously helpful to have everything streamlined and standardized. And like, I certainly don't envy. I guess for me, I say that just because I feel so bad for the Ukrainian logisticians. We're talking about logistics, I guess, this week, who are tasked with maintaining just such an insane array of equipment. I mean, we're talking everything. I couldn't even name to you the sources of all this military equipment, but it must be a trip to really have to keep all this stuff up. But as you said, like, it's not only is it all tanks are good, but this was a package that seemed pretty comprehensive. As you said, they sent spare parts with it. They sent ammunition with it. I don't know. So you said they're operating that IFV, because that IFV is kind of a unique thing as far as I understand.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, because this
It's
news
not
is
like Yugoslav stuff. This is from like Soviet
Yeah.
or not Soviet, communist Yugoslavia. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries, because I was researching about this like a month ago, because it's, it happened at the end of October that the letter of intent was actually signed. If I recall correctly, the Slovenians have delivered a couple of these IFVs. I might be mistaken, but I think the Slovenians have delivered a couple of them already to Ukraine, like in 2022 or so.
Yeah, that makes sense, because like all the former Yugoslav countries have this stuff. So it seems like more of this would probably benefit Ukraine, because there's probably a lot of this stuff laying around to some degree, and if we can get more ringtausches going, it's probably not a bad thing, right?
I mean, it depends, right? Like, I wouldn't want to have another ringtausch like we did with Greece, for example, anymore. That's like completely outdated, and that shouldn't be happening anymore. But there are some ringtauschs, like for example the one with Croatia, where I have no issues at all. Like, we give Croatia like 144 million, and they deliver 30 tanks, 30 IVs, spare parts, and ammunition to Ukraine within 8 weeks, and they buy German stuff with it. I think that's a perfect ringtausch, to be honest. Although you could, of course, argue that these 144 million could be invested in some better things, but I think you can nowhere else buy 30 tanks and 30 IVs within 8 weeks, right? Like, of course, you can buy stuff for Ukraine, but it might take half a year, or whatever, to produce and then deliver to Ukraine. Yeah, it depends.